You're listening to The John Hammer Show, thoughts and discussions from a preacher, disciple of Jesus, author, poet, and pastor. Brought to you by the Sunrise Podcast Network. For more information about Sunrise and or the Sunrise Podcast Network, check out isunrise.org. This podcast is also sponsored in part by Seattle Bible College. For more information about the school, check out seattlebiblecollege.edu.
Welcome, everybody, to Dear Young Man on The John Hammer Show. And I've got a dear friend, Phil Manginelli, who pastors the Square Church in Atlanta with his wife, Emily, and them and their 4 kids. Used to live up near me in the greater Seattle area in the suburbs up north here, and went to the Atlanta suburbs to plant a church 9 years ago. And so I'm just really happy because I get to sit across the table from my friend.
I know, this is so great.
It's just awesome. And so it's a little surreal because it's been a minute.
It's too long, actually.
Yeah, but it's great to have you. And obviously, you have family up here, and you pastored here for a long time. So it's kind of probably like another home away from home for you.
It is.
Yeah.
But you know what's interesting? It took me a while to enjoy coming back to Seattle.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And now I do. I just enjoy being here. My older brother's here. My parents are here. So there's those roots. But it took a little bit to kind of figure out how to come back the right way. Mm-hmm. It was harder than I thought it would be, to be honest.
Wow. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So why don't you, I just gave a real quick snapshot, but anything you want to add on what you're doing in life right now, how things are going, family, church, people that don't know you, maybe, give them the...
I'll give the 40,000 foot view. And just want to say how honored I am to be here and love you a lot. And
you too.
And actually just really deeply appreciate just even the conversations just around calling men to everything that God has for them. And so I'm really, I feel honestly really privileged to be able to kind of share in this. So quick high level Phil Manginelli story, born and raised in Idaho, had a pretty significant prodigal season in my life. God was kind and really met me in the middle of that. And then from there just transformed my life, went and joined YWAM. Which is a missions organization, and it was there that God really rescued my world, and I had a chance to meet my wife. It's a very Hallmark-ish movie, ice skating in Chiang Mai, Thailand, Christmas Day 2001. Still, waiting for somebody to buy the life rights to that story, but
it's a good Hallmark movie.
It is. It really would be. It would be one of those ones people are like, this is so cheesy.
I feel like I got an angle
crying.
too. I'm going to write the script for our little story,
And, but it was great. My wife is remarkable. We fell in love, felt a deep call, even though we were on the mission field towards the local church and pastoral ministry. And a big part of my story of both walking away and really having a profound anger and frustration and bitterness towards the church, and God began to redeem that and wanted to be a part of just what God wanted to do. And so when we got married and we moved to Southern California, we were there for a few years, got our degrees in pastoral ministry, biblical studies with Foursquare. We were in part of the Foursquare movement, so Life Pacific University. And then from there, actually went back on the mission field just for a season in Taipei, Taiwan. And after that, we moved to North Seattle, and we're youth and college pastors for that season. Obviously, where we met and became close friends, and youth pastoring side by side in cities next to each other. And then really there was an amazing season. Had our 2 oldest boys in that time. Saw some incredible things. Walked through some really hard things. Grew up a ton. And God just led us. And at the end, felt a deep sense of calling towards church planting. And my wife is born and raised in Atlanta. It's not why we moved back, but it's probably why that city is a part of our story. And we really felt like God was calling us back or calling us to Atlanta. And so we moved Christmas 2012, and with just us and our kids. There was a small team that came later, but began the process of planting church, and what started as like a Bible study in our living room has just become this really beautiful community. And so we're really grateful. So we pastor the Square, which is on the northwest side of Atlanta, and just really believe in wanting to contend for a revival in our life,
Yeah.
and feel very called to speak into what it means to follow Jesus in the midst of a secular culture. Feel like God has given us a heart and a voice for prodigals, and so it means entering into the pain of our current kind of cultural moment, and just love our church. I have the joy of being the co-host of the Jesus Culture podcast, so that's a lot of fun. Get to do that with Banning.
I've listened to some of those.
And
they're great.
they're fun, man.
They've been
So
really good.
so that's so I feel like this next season there's a lot of dreams in my heart, and and I feel like Atlanta's home, which I'm really grateful for. So just want to contend and be faithful.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, yeah, that's great. I think maybe it's been a couple of years. I don't know, but I mean, I know you're busy. You got a lot of friends. You got a lot going on. I have a lot happening in my world, but I was just, staying in touch with you through social media and not maybe talking a lot, but I just kept feeling drawn to try to connect because I was watching what you're doing with discipleship and building a house of prayer and talking about revival, and we had a lot of similarities. Well, you lived up here and enjoyed your friendship, but like, it just felt like as I became a lead pastor and, you're the church planner and lead pastor, there were so many similarities with what you're trying to do in your community. I was just kind of blown away when I'm looking.
I know, me too,
and I had
John.
looked at some of your notes and materials that you were working on, and I'm like, I've got like all these drafts that I'm working on that like no one in my church has seen at the time. And I'm like, it's just, it's so similar. It's just like, it was kind of eerie to me. Like, I gotta just, I mean, I know we're friends, but even
I'm
on like
so glad you did.
so much stuff that is happening, it just felt like, man, there's just so much similarities and between what God's doing. So I'm just encouraged by your story, your bravery. My dad's a church planner. Actually, you're here for our 35th anniversary as a church. So I was 6 years old when my dad planted Sunrise. And anyhow, so I grew up in a church planter's house, and so I have mad respect. Yeah, mad respect for you. And I haven't done that journey myself, but
I received that.
I've lived through it.
I received that, and I'm really honored by that. And there is a unique love and honor for church planners, but I will say, transitioning a church is a different kind of hard.
Oh man.
So it's almost like, this is what I've learned when you're younger, you just kind of don't know how all of the, you're just learning as a leader. But now looking back, I'm like, hey, somebody who legitimately has a sense of calling and towards pastoral ministry and feels that sense of calling towards being a lead shepherd or elder or what, the language someone would use. It's almost like I just want to be like, hey, you've got one of two crosses.
Yep.
So
right.
You're going to have the cross of pioneering, which is challenging, or you're going to have the cross of transitioning, which is really challenging.
It is. I know.
So it's almost like you just have to, the Lord speaks and you do what you sense He's called you to do out of obedience, because obedience is almost like the only thing that can get you through how hard some seasons are.
Right. Yeah. We had a seasoned guy here, Dr. Michael Maiden, who had like the craziest, ministry challenge and like comeback you could have possibly imagine, for someone that's not their own sin, because of other people's choices, the betrayal and devastation he went through. But when he was here, he was like, a lot of people, and I guess it took me a while to realize it, he even articulated, he goes, yeah, a lot of people probably think, oh, your dad started this church, you're the son, you just kind of get to continue all the hard work and just be blessed. He goes, they don't realize. And I'm like, I know, I don't even think I realized. I'm like, the church planners have it hard, but it's funny you say that, because the last, COVID, after even just trying to transition a church, because we had 1 year under our belts right before COVID hit.
Right.
And then it's like, man, it's so hard to explain. And and I have so many similarities. My dad is like the most amazing person and leader, so he had such a good foundation. But it's still, it's like, it's quite a ride. Yeah, you're right. Any way we slice it as a leader, there's just so many challenges, so many obstacles. But so I think like the Lord just spoke to me so much during COVID year, and it was like, if you don't give up, there's a reward on the other side. Because I'm like, why they say it like was 80% of pastors are looking for new careers after 2019, 2020.
And it's hard.
Yeah.
You know, I just even think because as a pastor, I feel privileged.
Yeah.
Like I'm not looking for self-pity or not that other people aren't walking through really hard circumstances. There's incredible honor and joy. And again, like I'm living my dream.
Yeah.
Now, I probably should dream like kinder dreams to myself, but you know, I mean, like I'm choosing and that, but I don't think people realize how difficult pastoral ministry is in general.
Yeah.
And that I would tell anyone, this has been the single most painful year for every pastor.
Oh.
I know.
Yeah.
I've never walked through.
Yeah.
It's not just that it was hard for me, or I don't know any pastor who wouldn't say this was these last 18 months, 2 years, whatever time frame we put around it, is the single hardest experience I've ever had as a pastor.
Oh, absolutely.
And the beating. It's been real.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. It's like the challenges and all that, but it is so rewarding. And to in every season, hopefully people find their purpose and they get to live out their purpose. And, like one mentor used to tell me, sometimes you get paid to do your purpose or like live your destiny out, and other times you work so that and it affords you the extra time or resources to do what you feel like your purpose or destiny is, what brings you life. Yeah. But yeah, for me, it's like in this season, it does feel like the career, the calling, everything, like it's so lined up that it feels like I really get to do this. Yeah. So no, that's great. You're an encouragement, man. You're such a blessing. And just, I know that you're encouraging a lot of leaders through just your life and what you're doing with the Jesus Culture podcast. And don't you have a special one that it's geared towards pastors too? I mean, we're going to talk more about young men than pastors and leaders today, probably, but,
we did. Yeah. So that one, we did like a season 1, and actually I think, I don't know, in a couple of months, we just recorded it. So season 2 will come out, and they're fun. They're really fun. Yeah.
That's good. Well, those are important resources for people. And one of the things that you did, which was really encouraging, again, just like so many similar things going on. And I've been just starting my podcast back up, and I do some that are focused more on theology and leadership, culture stuff, and then some that are focused on manhood, geared towards young men or those that love young men or raise young men. Yeah. And just, it's always been a huge passion of mine to just see God do something in the heart of men. I was always drawn to father and son narratives. Yeah. I was always capturing like cultural moments that are in sports or culture that are, on social media or films, storylines that just really resonated deeply with me and probably in my own journey. And then always just wanting to help other young men. I just felt drawn. And then, of course, talking a lot at different times through my life about freedom from pornography. So a lot of people would ask me to come share on that topic. Right. And anyway, I just ended up getting invested in the hurts and pains and disappointments that young men were dealing with that often led to negative or destructive behavior, sinful habits, and whatnot. So anyway, so I see that you're like got this whole course you're doing on masculinity. Yeah. What did you call it?
Yeah, we called it Biblical Manhood.
Biblical Manhood.
I mean,
okay.
So it's probably as generic as so many other titles, but that was the heart of it. It was just really trying to explore that.
And that's like triggering depending on what church culture people come from, because they're like the Biblical Manhood movement. It is like the Reformed Biblical Manhood.
When it's funny too, because we, which we are a church that is empowering of women in ministry, right? Mm-hmm. Which is quite normal. No matter where you kind of fall, like churches are obviously growing in kind of that sense of the place of men and women in ministry, even though many hold it in unique ways. But I had people in that who are like, "Oh, I didn't know we believed in stuff like this." I'm like, like in gender, that masculinity and femininity are things like you didn't think we believed that just because we so anyways I was like, this, and then you do realize that this is a conversation that has been handed over both to culture entirely, and then where it isn't, it's almost been handed over to a form of talking about masculinity is either really hyper connected to a Reformed theology, which I while I'm not Reformed, I really honor. I honor people. So it's not, I'm not saying that as a statement, but it's been basically handed over to Reformed theology, or to like almost what feels like cliche cultural examples of masculinity, where some people, if it connects with you, you feel super seen, but for a lot of people, like I'm never going to live that out. And so I feel like we haven't actually had really thoughtful conversations in this place. And as I begin to explore it, because I kind of accidentally stumbled into how this became as important to me as it has.
Yeah, tell me about that, because that's how I was interested. Like, what brought you down the path?
Well, so where it started. Anyway,
sorry.
No, that's a great question. But so I don't forget what I've learned is there's an importance that I can't put good language around, that we actually understand these things, and from a reclaiming them from the edges, or from maybe a theology. Or that to believe A equals B, I think we get to just come to the beauty of Scripture and actually see that there's something there for us. So where this like kind of this vision of realizing there's something we have to understand in this, actually just begin with a sense that I needed to really walk with my church through our convictions around sexual ethics, and we've been clear, right? We're a historic. Christian community. We hold to an Orthodox faith. We hold to a historic Christian sexual ethic. We believe in the biblical vision of marriage and sexuality and gender rights. So it's not that we've taught on those things a few times, but also we recognize, we genuinely want to position ourselves in love towards the LGBT community, or towards people who are walking through varied beliefs, and that's a challenging reality. And so there's a way you want to speak to those issues, and the way you want to invite people into those storylines. And so, but in that, what I realized was my church, even though we've taught through it before, or we had definitely, we had a statement of belief, I hadn't really equipped my church to actually go, why do we believe what we believe?
Right.
And one of the things I found is the tension that basically there was this broken narrative that either you're gonna stand with truth, or you're gonna stand with love, and these are like these two options, and Christians believe they have to pick one of the two,
totally.
Right? And it's a false storyline, right? Jesus is the full manifestation of both of those. And in realizing, because I hadn't equipped my church, I'd actually robbed them from knowing how to reunite those two things, and I felt a deep conviction around it, and also recognizing that a lot of our questions around the issues of sexuality are actually deeply connected to cultural belief systems, and where this is probably the place where I feel God is most equipped, in the sense of like, if God has put a unique thing on my life, it's to speak into some of those circumstances of culture. And so realizing that the shift that has happened, right? Why does the Christian church basically hold to a position on sexuality for 2,000 years, and then in our life, it's suddenly up for grabs. And again, that feels like even a cheap way of talking about it, because I know that people could be listening to this, and there's pain here. There's pain if you yourself identify with same-sex attraction. There's pain if you have a family member. Like, these are not. So I want to be very conscious. I'm not trying to treat these things cheaply, but even in that that's what I felt like my church needed. They needed me to slow down and walk through, why do we hold what we hold, and does it actually matter? Like, is this really about some weird belief that we hold to, or is there actually substance to it? And in that, I knew I needed to address gender. I needed to address the transgender issues, gender fluidity. I needed to address same-sex attraction, LGBT community. We needed to address it all. So in this, I realized, like, if I'm going to come with significant theological thoughts for my church, it all begins in understanding what we believe about male, female, creation story, Genesis. Does it matter? Does it not matter? Is it ultimately a picture of two human beings that God has given to each other in this covenant of marriage? Is it more than that? How do we hold that? So, and so what began to happen, right, in that greater story of needing to work through this for my church, I begin to find that there was a vision of maleness and femaleness that I had never fully appreciated. It's almost like I can only say it this way because we had never had to ask the question before, is maleness and femaleness a thing, right?
Yeah.
In some ways, there's that place where you're like, well, of course there is, right? Of course. And those who've grown up in the Christian tradition specifically would probably be like, well, of course there is.
Yeah.
And I would still say, yes, of course there is. But that's also, there's probably always needed to be some deeper questions asked. Like, why? What is maleness? What is femaleness? Do these things actually matter? Obviously, we see the biological part of it, the sexual part of it.
Yeah.
But is there more to it than that? And I think what I became so struck by was actually the fundamental picture of the creation story, that in God's image, he made male and female. And that actually speaks to a reality of what it means to be male. It speaks to a reality of what it means to be female. It speaks to a reality of what God's doing in the world. Because I'm convinced the whole story of the scriptures is a story of marriage. It's a story of co-ruling. That God had invited Adam and Eve, male and female, and there's something unique about this storyline, to co-rule with him in the garden. And then, of course, the fall comes and the storyline moves forward. And then what does God do? He wants to marry Israel. Yeah. This is the language. God wants to co-rule with Israel for the sake of the world. And, of course, ultimately, Jesus comes as the fulfillment of that. And what does Jesus want to do? We are the bride of Christ. He wants to co-rule with the church for the stewardship and the renewal of all things. Yeah. And then ultimately the life that is to come, like God the Father, God the Son, God the Spirit, the Trinitarian God with the church, Jew and Gentile, now fully together. What do we get to do? We get to co-rule in eternity with God. Like there's this realization and actually the piece of it around gender, right? Yeah. And this tiny little phrase in Genesis of suitable helper, which is a phrase that I think we've commonly misunderstood the significance of it. And in that we see a picture, right? This idea of the word that translates as suitable. Suitable is a pretty good word, but it's a hard word to translate. It's one of those words that, like, to translate it well, you'd have to use multiple words, and I understand why that would make the Bible so long that I mean, our Bibles are quite remarkable. Yep. But the essence of this word is like but not like. Yeah. And you realize that what makes Adam and Eve suitable for each other is that they're like, but they're not like. Yeah. And this helper is not a subservient word, no matter what you would hold about, the assignments that God has placed on men and women. Yeah. This word means helper, but in every other portion of the scripture, it's referring to God. To God, yeah. God is actually, and it's the idea of him being military aid. So when Israel is incapable of fulfilling its assignment, God becomes their helper, and he steps in and he does what? He comes with military aid to help them fulfill the assignment on their life. And you realize this is the vision of marriage. Yeah. Like but not like military aid, because we have an assignment to rule. And that picture, so if we actually are going to be faithful to what God has called us to do, in this picture of our personal lives, in the picture of our marriages, but also in this picture now in the church, that this is what we are to Jesus. We are his like but not like. Yeah. Co-rulers, and the only reason we're qualified is because we've received Jesus' righteousness, right? But that's what he's done. He's taken us in, and there is something profound. Maleness and femaleness, they are like, but they are not like. And it is actually the variance that is, when we see it, is the assignment to co-rule with each other, because we are called to be military aid. I think you could certainly, some people could look at that and go, well, that's a statement assigned to Eve. I would say when I think you understand it in its theological context, it's certainly, while it is assigned to Eve, it is a picture of both and. If Eve is to Adam a like but not like military aid, then certainly Adam is to Eve a like but not like military aid. And I think there's, in this picture, is something about going, we have to understand that there are embedded things in maleness and in femaleness, and especially in a culture that says no, there isn't. Yeah. That actually maleness and femaleness are cultural constructs, and they've been assigned by a doctor, not by God. And coming back to the place of going, no, there is, and it's not just about your biology, it's not just about your sexual activity, that there is an inherent piece of the image-bearing nature of God that he has uniquely put in you that is different, that God is fully represented in maleness and femaleness.
Yeah.
And that's not saying that you as a man or you as a woman, if you're single, don't fully represent the character and nature of God.
Yeah.
It means that we as a humanity, in our maleness and femaleness, express the character and nature of God. And that there is something about God fully placed in men and something about God fully placed in women that are different.
Yep.
And we have to see that. And when we start to see it, I think it awakens things in people's lives. So that's probably too long of an answer.
No, that's good. Yeah.
But that's where it came from, was like, and I was surprised by it. While I wasn't surprised by preparing for the sexual ethics teaching, I was like, oh, I have to rally. I have to come alongside of my men.
Right.
And walk with them in this. And I really do have a heart of trying to help men see this. And then in plans with my wife, Emily, about doing this also within womanhood and the vision of femininity.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of little tangents to go here, little angles to go. But, I think one of the questions that we have to think about culturally, but even in the church is, you hear the phrase like toxic masculinity. And I think what has become true for a lot of men is that they end up hearing that masculinity is toxic. Yeah. And as we're looking back at the Adam and Eve story and sin and the fall of man, we're trying to differentiate like what is unique to our intent, our created design, and what is a result of our fallenness. Yeah. Right. So
absolutely.
What, because a lot of people want to, tear down the patriarchy or say that these distinctions don't matter, or they're a social construct, or, they're part of just evolutionary process maybe.
Right.
But I love that proverb, and it's just like, beware of removing the ancient landmark, or beware of moving the landmark of your forefathers.
Yeah.
Right. Because it's like, well, we could tear down the patriarchy and we could erase some of these things, but like that proverb is kind of like, you can remove it if you want, but then down the road, you're going to find out why it was there. Yeah. And you might not know why it's there right now, or have a good understanding of why it's there. But as soon as it's removed, you might be like, oh, should we have moved that?
Right.
Should we have, and so it's a tricky, I think it's tricky,
it is tricky
for sure to talk through these things. And I know we probably won't get into like all the theology today on it, but there's the big egalitarian complementarian debate, especially in the evangelical church,
right,
that's been raging for, I don't know, was it since like the 70s maybe that it's been going on. And I think like our church is very pro women involved in ministry, leadership, life, but I'm probably not a full-blown egalitarian, you know? And so I don't know if I'm a soft complementarian or what, but that's the one thing about egalitarianism that I haven't been able to fully put my arms around is I don't feel like I can hear the difference side.
Sure.
Of course, it's all about equality, same opportunity. All doors should be open for life, leadership, careers. And a lot of it, I'm like, but then I'm like, but I don't feel good about saying that dad can do everything mom can do and mom can do everything dad can do.
Right.
Or that a man can be everything a woman can be and a woman can be everything a man can be. And that's where to me, I'm like, so, I mean, if a woman's a lawyer, a president, a ministry leader, I don't have a problem with that.
Right.
But at the same time, I'm like, if the church is the family of families, we're the household of God, and in a family, I can't be mom and mom and my wife can't be dad.
Right.
Then is there even something in the church? Is there something around the way, and should that influence even how we present in society to some degree? And where do you draw those lines?
Totally.
It's like, anyway, I'm
with you, John,
going,
and I think this is important.
It's a challenging.
I think this is actually really important because ultimately, I think the starting place on this is so simple, right? But this is the challenge, is that I want to come to the place like I believe Jesus, right? And so I'm not afraid. Like Jesus, he's the resurrected Lord of human history. He created all things.
Yep.
Like if I believe him, then I want to believe him all the way.
Right.
And I think what I've found is that so many people who follow Jesus want to come to these issues and they're afraid.
Mm-hmm.
So it's almost like they keep it at a distance. So
Yeah.
they either don't know what they believe, or what they do is they backfill it with all of their own belief,
Mm-hmm.
and are unwilling to actually come to the place of going, well, what and I think as Christians, what we have to say is this, like, if I believe Jesus rose from the dead,
Yeah.
and if I believe he's Lord,
Yeah.
which are two big statements,
Mm-hmm.
and I get there's people that are probably wrestling with those questions, but if
Yeah.
I can land on those two statements,
Yeah.
then what it means is whatever he says is true.
That's right.
So whatever he says is true. And so I need to then come and I need to let Jesus define gender.
Mm-hmm.
I need to let Jesus define maleness
Yeah.
and femaleness. And I need to let Jesus define marriage. I need
Yeah.
to let Jesus define these things. And I think if we would do that, then what we would find is that we come, because even in that, I want to say, like, right, even you and
Yeah.
John, we've talked about this a little bit.
Yeah.
We would hold some variance, some difference
Yeah.
on where we are at. And I would. What's funny is I've come to the place where I no longer love the terms complementary.
I don't like
or
either. I don't
egalitarian,
like
right?
it either.
And I even don't. I've even tried this, right? Like I basically, there's that phrase, I do like complementary without hierarchy, and or whether, but not everyone. What I would say is, when I look at it myself, I want to say this: the people I am in unity with are people who come to a genuine place of conviction because of the lordship of Jesus.
Yeah.
And not people who agree with me.
Right. That's
And I
good.
find
Yeah.
that commonly people who hold an egalitarian position do so because they've informed them with a lot of cultural beliefs.
Yeah.
As somebody who's commonly been identified in that
Yeah.
camp, right? And people who are complementarian, I think, do hold to at times a kind of a very cultural view of masculinity and femininity that actually isn't really deeply rooted in the scriptures. So I think it's fair at times to look at both of these
Yeah.
edges and see the weaknesses and the different things that are in them. And I just want but what I want to encourage people is it's so easy to come like guns raised, look either
Right.
one either side, like look at the patriarchy, and
Yeah.
guys, awful and evil things have happened
Yeah.
in the name of patriarchy,
Yeah.
right? Like you can look
Yeah.
at Afghanistan and be
Yeah.
like,
Right.
this is evil things
Right.
happen
Yeah.
when there is this broken male-dominated picture. And again,
Right.
you don't even have to go to that extreme of examples
Right.
to see that, right?
Yeah.
And then of course, and then you have the other side where it's like, gender is a construct. Men and women are exactly the same. There's nothing different. We can do it.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, I know that's not true. And so you feel, and I think if we can just be a people who come, we drop accusation,
Yeah.
we drop our agendas, we just come to the scriptures, we get counsel
Right.
and wisdom and help. Jesus is beautiful.
Yeah.
His vision of marriage is beautiful. Image bearers carry.
Yeah,
Women are.
absolutely.
Jesus just lifts women up.
Right.
Right. The New Testament. By the way, every value we
Totally.
have about the worth
Yeah.
of human life,
Yeah.
the worth of women.
It's
You want to know where this all
Jesus.
just came from? Jesus.
Yeah.
They all came from the Bible.
Yeah.
They all came from Christianity. We don't have to be afraid. All of those things are actually so we can come and go, man. If whatever Jesus has for us, we can trust. And
Right.
what we can do, and also within Orthodoxy, we can go, man, there
Totally.
are godly, biblically centered people
Yeah.
that are landing in some different positions. So I can explore
No.
this genuinely and not be afraid of where it's going to land.
No, I love it. That's what it should be about. I love it.
So what's
so good?
So
Phil,
what I've
but-
learned in that is
Yeah.
I would actually say I'm a complementarian who believes my job is to make my wife my equal. So I'm not saying everybody would have to agree with that.
Right, yeah.
So it's almost like it has a outside look. Emily and I really do
Yeah.
but there's a way that we get to how we get to in a
Right.
sense of deep understanding about maleness, femaleness, that our assignments are different. I believe Ephesians
Yeah.
5. I believe all of
Right.
Ephesians 5. I believe in headship. Now I hold that to be uniquely probably than others would be. I mean, we can talk about that if we
Right.
want to. But anyways, my point is I
Yeah.
believe Jesus.
Right.
So I want
Come
to. I
on.
want to hold these things.
Yeah.
Everything he has is good.
And-
And if he has a masculinity for me, I
Sure.
want it all. And if he has a femininity for my wife, she wants it all.
Yeah.
And we want to fully represent that in the beauty of Jesus.
Totally. And I mean, like, I love what did Jesus teach? What did Jesus do? If
Yeah.
our beliefs come out, if our actions come out of what we believe, or a
Yeah.
manifestation of what we believe. And, Jesus, even he brings it back to the story you started with, Adam and Eve.
Yeah.
He's what Moses said,
Yeah.
and I love that you brought out the helper, and the other thought about marriage and male, female that I think has been helpful for me to not be like a hard complementarian or to maybe interpret some of those things through a harsh cultural lens is the idea of oneness.
Yeah.
The two shall become one flesh. Yeah. So my overall pursuit with Grace, my wife, is that we walk in oneness.
Yeah.
So there is a sense in equality or a unity because we're really trying to be one.
Yeah.
And then I guess I would say, I like what you said. It's different than I would say it, but it's so similar. It's probably a little nuanced difference. Like you say, like complementarian with trying to make my wife my equal. And I look at it as like, well, we're one, but within our oneness, there seems to be like a leader and a support, but we're there to lead together. We're there to co-lead, co-rule, but my function would be slightly different than her function, and I believe that I'm first to lay my life down, to sacrifice and to, support what God has for her, my children. So it's so similar. But anyway, I love, because the vision of Jesus, and I think a lot of people don't realize that, I have not read his work like a lot of other cool pastors have, but Tom Holland, who wrote, some stuff about the Christianity and the Christianization of the world, and is a historian, and they just went around Twitter the other day, one of his quotes, but he's like, isn't it interesting that the very things that revolutionized the world for women and for sexual practices that benefited women, that were birthed in Christianity, are now the very beliefs that Christianity is being attacked for. So many centuries later. Right. And there was several Eastern countries in Asia. I remember seeing a survey a few years back, and many women self-reported that like them burning their dinner was an acceptable reason for their husband to beat them. When they're cooking their meal, or if they don't, there was, anyway, it was like, and these are not, and this is not a criticism of their religions, but these were not Christian dominated nations. Right. And the women themselves are under a cultural place of like that corrupt patriarchal, oppressive kind of thing, where men can rule as tyrants and beat women over something like, burned rice. Right. And the women think it was, I deserve that. Right. So you think the whole way, like you said, Jesus is the one that elevated, and people think it's like a secular idea, and Christians are trying to oppress. And so it's like, even the complementarian view of women is, I mean, there's probably some unhealthy extremes that you hear preached from pulpits, sadly, but even that's liberating compared to what you can see around the world. So I was even talking to our church on Sunday, and I was like, don't let secularism take stuff that Jesus really initiated, and then they kind of twist it a little bit.
They do. And that's like, Mark Sayers, talks a lot about this, and he talks about how we're in a unique moment where not only secularism is broken out of the world, but it's distinctly post-Christian, which is only going to be, there's a certain time frame that kind of exists, right? Yeah. And so there's like, it's a secular culture that's living off of the ethers of Christendom, right? Yeah. So it's, Mark Sayers talks about how it's Christianity without Christ, or the kingdom without the king.
I love Mark Sayers.
And and even in this gender issue, right? It's Imago Dei without Dei. It's that sense of, I want all of the beliefs of being an image bearer of God, all of the ideas that come with that, the value of human life, the dignity of human life, but I want to remove God from the equation. And we forget that actually all of these secular values in their current form are keeping the value of the value of human dignity and worth and life, and then but removing anything sacred connected to responsibility and stewardship, and that is going to ultimately they're incompatible, and they'll break. And if we don't see we have to take this back, right, we're setting up our lives for failure. And
I guess in some ways, that the way you describe it, it makes me more hopeful or optimistic, because I think as a younger Christian and leader, I used to get scared about the drift towards secularism that I saw in the culture, thinking like it's just going to get worse and worse and everything's going to be bad. But I started to realize, like you said, we hit moments, but things aren't going to stay. So we have an opportunity to speak into things and help define where culture goes. Right. And we're not necessarily going to get stuck here, because these ideas, when the foundation's gone, they're not going to be upheld. Right. So like they're going to topple. The idea is what's going to be built in their place as they crumble, and are we going to be there to be loving, to be truthful, to try to dig into the ancient paths of Scripture and find out, these are the ways to walk in, or how can we navigate from here to there? So I'm very hopeful as you talk about that, and love like a lot of the stuff Mark Sayers says and on that kind of thing. So as you were starting to talk to all these you're doing these courses on biblical manhood, do you do like 8 weeks.
Yeah, we did 8 of them.
8 weeks. What was like your overall what was your overall content?
Yeah. So where it kind of started was we had basically the first week we just kind of talked about this picture of being image bearers, and I think we really do have to see there's more in the creation story than we want to know, and also, or not that we want to know than we maybe realize is there, but there's also. I know this sounds small, and to some people that are like, "Oh, Phil, is that a big deal?" And I'm like, "Well, it is a big deal, and it's going to be a big deal to your children if you don't think it is, right? Like, is gender a thing?"
Yeah.
And I think understanding why, as Christians, we actually come from a theological position to go, yes, gender is a designed gift from God, and it is sacred, and it's fundamentally so wrapped into the way God created us. When we deny it, when we try to deny it, it's gonna actually break. Not only our lives, but the cultures that we are a part of. So I think it's really important that we kind of grow in a sense. So the first week was really about just this unique. There is a unique image of God given to men, and it's I think the creation story and the fall. They speak to this. They speak undeniably. They speak to its existence, right? And then in certain ways you begin to see. The formation of it, and I would say we probably have to the reality of Adam and his both his unique calling and his unique curse, and Eve and her unique calling and unique curse. I would say in the Genesis story we can see 3 things. We can see identity, we can see assignment, and we can see virtues. And I think if we're going to understand maleness and femaleness, I think then what we have to do is go, okay, birthed in the creation story is this sense of identity, an identity that is connected to our gender. And in your gender is identity, in your gender is assignment, and in your gender is virtue. And then to fully understand all of those things is Genesis to Revelation. Genesis to Revelation are the unpacking of all of those things. So I don't think we can look at Genesis 1, 2, and 3 and say, oh, everything we need to know about gender exists in those 3 chapters. I don't think that's true. I think, but it's the starting point, and it has to be the starting point. And what Genesis 1, 2, and 3 establishes is your imago Dei matters, and maleness is different than femaleness, and that there is in maleness and in femaleness is assignment, identity, and virtue. And then from there is a foundation that we have to let the rest of the story begin to unpack. And so then from there, what I would say is what I wanted to pull out was that in the greater story, I believe that there is a central vision of manhood that helps everything else take shape. And I believe it's the picture that's kind of typified in Ephesians chapter 5 around headship. And this vision of what we see as the call of the husband towards his wife, and this identity, I believe that when we actually begin to see it in a really larger picture, that there is an identity given to men that matters that we function in, not only for ourselves, it matters we function in towards our wives and our families, but it matters that we function in towards society. And again, that and I would say that regardless of where you would kind of, as you wrestle through what headship is, that you would, even where it might lead people to varied conclusions, I would say undeniably, whatever headship is a unique assignment given to men. But the Bible affirms that all over the place. And these are parts of the Bible people don't like. And I understand that. These are like, especially, right? These are, because I think there has been, right? When we talk about toxic masculinity, we talk about, broken patriarchy. I believe me, I've sat with stories where what husbands have done to their wives in the name of being the head, or what people have said about the value of women in the reality of this. I mean, even when you look at the church fathers, like things people have said about women are heartbreaking and not true. And so I understand that for some people, they're terrified of this concept of headship because it speaks to something. Now, it speaks to 2 things. I think it speaks to real pain, number one. And so I really want to honor that there has been, this is a concept misused. And so there's real pain for people in the midst of that. But then there's also, it is antagonistically against what culture is saying. And people, I say this all the time, people don't realize how secular they are until they try to believe Jesus, right? And it's like, oh, well, hey, listen, again, I want to say, if I believe Jesus, I believe he's resurrected Lord of human history, I believe his word is trustworthy, then when the Bible says, husband, you are the head of your wife as Christ is the head of the church. Whatever that means is true.
Yeah.
I don't want to act like it isn't.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? This is this place, and we with this idea that like the Bible, I can go, well, that was cultural. That is a garbage way to read the Bible.
I know, and especially when Paul ties it to Christ and the church. That's where
Yes.
I'm like,
And yes, is it informed by, like, is there, like, you and I
Sure.
both are, right,
Yeah.
we're good Bible students. You have to
Yeah.
read the Bible in context. You have to
Sure.
understand the moment. So I'm not saying
Right.
contextualization doesn't matter, because I think it really
Sure.
does matter.
Sure.
But the idea of like, oh, that's part of the Bible I don't believe anymore because it was cultural. I'm like, no. That's the worst way to read the New Testament.
Yeah.
Every part of the New Testament is for our good and has
Yeah.
life to offer us. And that's not a fundamentalist position.
Yeah.
That is actually just
Totally.
believing Jesus. Now, yes, do we have to do the work? Because not all of the Bible means or is meant, like, okay, let's take head coverings. So let me
Yeah.
pause and just stop, right? If people could hear me and go, well, then everybody should be wearing head coverings. And I'll be like, no. Because what being good students of the Bible means that there's times what Paul is doing or what the scriptures are doing
Yeah.
is they're always calling us to a timeless truth. And sometimes that timeless truth is a direct pull to exactly what the command is.
Right.
And sometimes it's a contextual reality of a timeless truth, right? Paul is talking about in head coverings has to do with gender, has to do with honor, has to do with sexuality, has to do with marriage. It has to do with the reality that what's happening in Corinth is women are coming into church and in their false sense of freedom are basically abandoning their gender out of an expression that they're free in Christ. And doing so, they're bringing shame on their husbands and they're bringing confusion into culture.
Yeah.
And so what's the truth of that statement? It's not that to be obedient to Scripture, you need to be wearing a head covering.
Right.
But the idea that verse doesn't matter? No, let me tell you what that verse means, is that actually when we come into the place of worship, that we cannot disregard our gender, we cannot bring dishonor upon our spouse, and we cannot bring confusion to the body of Christ. And if you want to undo that verse, you have fun with that. When Paul says, greet each other with a holy kiss, right? People are like, well, what is Paul actually saying? He's actually saying that when you are family in Christ and you are of two massively different cultural socioeconomic gaps, in public, you treat each other like brothers.
Yep.
The idea, could you imagine in first century Rome, right? John, this is stuff I'm preaching to the choir,
Right.
but could you imagine a rich, prominent Roman citizen and a slave coming to each other and greeting each other as equals,
Right.
and making a statement about the counterculture kingdom of God? You want to tell me that doesn't matter?
Right.
So my point is, reading the Bible
Right.
to say, well, that's cultural is really bad Bible.
Yeah.
We have to allow the reality of Scripture bear witness, and sometimes that takes the point of that verse is not that we kiss each other.
Yep.
The point of that verse is that we are not allowed to actually treat each other like we're not equals.
Yeah.
Even if in socioeconomically or culturally we're not equals, in the kingdom we are, and the kingdom is stronger than whatever our world tells us, right? And so I just want to come back to this and go, okay, so headship has had some problems in people's lives. And it's speaking against culture. Neither of those are worthy reasons to act like it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
So whatever this comes to, it means, and again, I could go on
Sure.
a longer conversation about
no
this,
worries.
but for me, I would say the vision of headship is sacrificial leadership in the place of laying down your life to lift somebody else up. Now, I think there's a lot in there. I think Paul's doing. He's actually speaking to a lot of cultural beliefs around these Greek concepts of headship of the head and the fullness, and these are things that I could get into. But I think it's a vision. It's a distinct vision of a sacrificial leadership, of laying down your life to raise up the good of others. And I think that this is a central call to men, that men are called to be servant protectors. If I could say there's one, if I would put it in our language, there is a unique identity asked of men to be servant protectors that is not being asked of women.
Right.
And women are being called to things that are not
meant.
And again, I think that there's different visions of how that can express itself, but this is undeniable. And when men don't know this, that you actually have an identity, an assignment, and virtues attached to. You have a central identity as a man. You are a servant protector. And if you don't know how to live that out, if you don't know what that is, if you don't know what that is towards society, if you don't know what that is towards your wife or your children, if you don't know what that is towards the church, then how can you ever be faithful? And I feel like this is this missing piece of men in the world because they don't know who they've been called to be.
Right. So let me throw something at you, see if you can help me with it, if you've heard this or thought through this at all. There's some of the, I'll even put it on the Christian side. I'm not super well versed, but a little bit familiar with like the manosphere or the red pill community. Which the red pill, are you familiar with them at all? A little bit? Yeah. It's like, so anybody listening, red pill is like basically, you took the red pill, so you're awake. And as men, you realize that there's like a move against men, and women are, taking men to the cleaners in divorce court and expecting men to do all these things, but then women get more privileges in society. And it's a reaction to extreme feminism. And, and then there even is some Christians that are probably in that space that are a little more balanced or healthy, but they're trying to help men kind of recover their soul. So one of the criticisms I've heard from some of these guys wrestling with these concepts is like, well, the church is making a bunch of statements. So they put like quotes from like some big name evangelical Reformed preachers, like, if you're a servant leader and you're sensitive to your wife's needs, like, you're going to get rewarded in the bedroom. Or like, if you're, like, godliness is sexy, being a kind husband that puts your wife first is like, it's going to, and some of the critics of those statements that are even in the Christian version of the manosphere, right? They're saying like, well, but women aren't really necessarily attracted to the servant leader because they're and like the psychologist people like Jordan Peterson, they're like, girls like boys that beat other boys, that win over other boys,
sure.
And so they're saying like girls are attracted to somebody who's making more money, stronger, more successful, can give them a better life. They're like, look at all the data. It doesn't matter where we've evolved to as society. It's still pretty true most of the time.
Right.
So anyway, so I'm like, I feel like their critique of servant leadership isn't what I think of as servant leadership or what you said, servant protector.
Yeah.
Because to me, it's like, I think there is still a part of manliness that's like the servant leader or the servant protector, like the leader or protector side is strong, can like, there's another guy, I love his stuff on Manhood. He wrote a book, it just came out, called Battle Cry. He has another book, Cry Like a Man. Jason Wilson. Yeah. He's the martial arts instructor that went viral, like saying it's okay to cry to the student that can't break the board.
I remember
so
that.
He's been in a lot of interviews lately. And he talks a lot about like teaching his boys, like, you got to be the lion and the lamb. There's times where you got to be able to turn on the lion, but you got to be able to revert to the lamb as soon as possible. You can't live in the rage of the lion all the time, but at times to be a protector. And so I think he talks about that balance. But anyway, so wrestling with these concepts and just trying to help guys like that are in the thick of it. You know, I think sometimes guys hear servant leader and they almost think of like, okay, honey, whatever you want to do, like you get to take over. So anyway, can you respond to that a little bit?
Oh, John, it's so good. I mean, I have so many thoughts. So you'll have to stop me. Well, again, I would just say in the midst of this is I find so many people, they're coming to conclusions culturally and then telling the Bible what it has to mean. Yeah. And I think everybody's doing that from every side. And I just think listen, any theology you build out of reaction is a terrible theology. Right. And so I just want to encourage, like, amen. I'm amazed
I'm so with you.
at how people are like, well, this is happening in society, so we have to, I'm like, well, listen, I want to respond to society, but where I start is with Jesus. Yeah. And I end with Jesus, and then I respond out of Jesus. Like, there is not an ounce of cultural belief that I want to invade into my belief in Jesus. Yeah. Right. And so I'd say in the midst of that, there's no doubt that we are living in a unique moment of a push, both from femininity, radical feminism, and the concepts of secularism around gender fluidity that are pressing on these issues. And so there's always going to be that sense of response. And what I would say is again. So so again, I'll quickly tell you about. So I think that this picture of the invitation of being servant protectors, which is the way I would communicate this vision of what being the head is, right? Is the central idea, and that blends into this vision of community, that men are called to be fences and roofs in the midst of community. I think it's a very important role that they play. And then those things are defined by virtues. And this is what we miss. Because I think the wrong statement, this is what I think people get wrong, is biblical manhood is blank. And what people fill into that statement is a type of man.
Yeah.
Right? And I go, oh, that's not biblical.
Yeah.
You want to know what? Because Abraham and David and Joshua and Elijah and Daniel were all representing biblical manhood, and they were different.
That's so true.
They were different. And when we look at the New Testament, we see different visions of biblical manhood. And you got Barnabas the encourager, and you've got Paul the pioneer. Those are different men, fully expressing biblical manhood. So I want to say that the idea that biblical manhood is blank, and you're filling it in with a concept,
body type, facial hair, volume of speech,
culture,
the way they
culture. That's bad Bible.
Clothing, facial hair.
And I think it's why it's hard. It's why it's hard to really rally around this, because ultimately what people do, instead of going, no, biblical manhood is an identity shaped by virtues.
Well,
and you can have, and so I define these. So these are the virtues that strength, courage, wisdom, self-restraint, honor, justice. So these are what I would say are these 6 central virtues that we see shape and define manhood. And you're going to see them expressed differently in types of personalities. You're going to see them expressed differently in types of understanding. There's a quiet version of those things. There's a loud version of those things. There's a extroverted. There's all different. There are many kinds of men, but there is an identity of what it means to be a man that's meant to express itself no matter what unique personality traits you have. So there are things that are meant to bleed into all men, but they're not what we thought they were. They're really about calling. They're really about role and identity. And so what I would say, kind of going back to some of those pictures, is I would say, there is, whether people would be surprised I would say this or not, there is undeniably a push against men being men who are driven towards like toughness, men who are driven towards that place of like they want to respond with a sense of like that. What I would say is that is actually an accurate vision of manhood for some men. And the idea that we would rob that from them is really foolish. Now, what I would say again in the retrospect is like, that is also, I think, a foolish statement to say that's a vision of what all men should be like.
That's very good.
And so I think we have to, listen, because I think actually there's a part of manhood that is the laying on of hands in the wrong way, right? Like I think about the idea of when you put in a grade school scenario, right? And there is a picture. You think about this. I think most, there is a place where somebody is bullying another kid.
Yes.
And a boy comes up and he grabs him and he pushes him against the locker. And that picture of like, you don't get to do that.
Right.
I would actually say that is beautiful.
Yeah.
And I can understand. Now, it would probably take a longer conversation for people who would think that's not that beautiful.
Right.
But I would say, no. There is something in there. There is something centered around the heart of justice, and justice is not ideological. Justice is getting your hands dirty, bringing correction to things that are unjust. And there is a place in manhood that it longs to express itself in those kind of forms. Now, but I would say, so I do think there is a place like masculinity. We long for strength. We long for mastery. We long for courage. We respect men. Now, here's the thing. But at the core, I respect men who are strong. But it's not always. I'm not physically strong. Right. But I respect men who are strong in their convictions. I respect men who are strong in their emotions. I respect men who are strong in their skills. I do respect men who are strong in their
Physically,
strength,
yeah.
right? But and that's the vision. But when we want to act like men don't respect strength,
Yeah.
or that men don't want to be strong, you're like,
yeah.
there isn't a man on the planet
Yeah.
who doesn't want to be strong,
And-
not because of toxic masculinity,
right.
but because of an assignment before
Design,
God, because they
virtue.
were made
No,
for this.
I love
Now,
it.
So the problem is that we've said strength is one thing,
Yep.
and that's not true.
Right.
Being a man isn't being able to bench press something.
Yeah.
But being a man is having a vision of going, I've been uniquely made,
Right.
and I've been given an identity of strength, and how do I need to steward that?
Oh, that's so good.
And I think that place, because then, so to push back then on the other side is when I get people are like, oh, the church needs way more masculine, and people are running away from the church because of certain things. So I'm like, I don't love all of those conversations, because I think men just need to grow up. That's
If men are so tough, then why run away when it's not?
I want to say back to people like, well, the church is too feminine. I'm like, well, that's what happens when you abandon the church and you leave it over to women.
Yeah.
Women are the faithful ones.
Right.
So the church is going to reflect those who are there. So
Right.
men, if you want to see the church be a little more holistic, how about
Be
you
the
stick
change.
around and stop being an idiot? That's probably too strong.
Yeah.
But I do think men need to grow up.
Right.
And men, if you want to see the church fully express more
Right.
manhood, then get in the ground. Because you want to know who's showing up to my prayer meetings? Women.
Right.
You want to know who's volunteering through the week? Women. You want to know who are discipling? Women. You want to and
Right.
you know what? Jesus shows up to the faithful.
Yeah.
So the church is going to look like the faithful. I would be proud to pastor a church of faithful if it's all women, because I want to be with the faithful. So men got it. So I push back on men, but I would say this. I'm talking so much,
you're
John.
good. I love it.
I keep going at this. But what I want to say,
Two preachers together.
I know what I want to say is that Jesus only describes his nature, not talking about theologically, but his nature, one place in the Bible. And this is what he says. He goes, I am gentle and I'm humble of heart.
Yeah.
And if the Lord of the universe, when describing himself, says I'm gentle and I'm humble, then that's manhood.
Yeah.
Then
That's right.
manhood is found in those places.
Right.
And so when people want to act like they're not, I understand when people push back on the generic vision of manhood.
Right.
Because I'm like, you know what, man? Jesus was humble. I mean, God, what does God have to be humble about? But he is. Jesus was gentle. He was gentle. People loved being around him. Sinners loved being around him. But he flipped tables, right? So there's the spectrum in Jesus. He died. He's coming again. He's coming again with a sword, and that doesn't mean he's coming back to kill his enemies, but it does mean he's coming back with strength, and he will judge the nations.
Yeah.
He will hold mankind accountable. The same Jesus that hung on the cross is the same Jesus who's coming again. But what we don't understand is that the suffering servant was the resurrected king, and the resurrected king will always be the suffering servant. Jesus will always be all of who he was.
Right.
And what
The
I'm
lion and the lamb.
He was the lion and the lamb. And I don't like. I heard people one time be like, "Well, he came as the lamb, but he's coming back as the lion." And I'm like, "Oh no, he came as the lamb and the lion, and he's coming back as the lamb and the lion."
Right.
And we can't
You
miss
can't
that part
fully.
of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I love it. I mean, you're making
Oh, John,
my
I'm talking
brain
too much.
explode.
I'm sorry.
No, you're making my brain explode in a good way. I get all these ideas. I'm like, oh man. Well, even that guy Jason Wilson I was talking about, he has his Cave of Adullam, the kata training academy that he does for these boys, and like he talked about an interview he did recently where there was a Christian boy in his program that was getting bullied at school, and he's trying to help these kids, and he's like, you got to teach kids not to be the bully, because sometimes that's when kids get into they're being bullied and they get some kind of somebody coming in their corner, they end up just retaliating like the bully to try to stand up. And so he said, but I told him, he said, he goes, it's like, you think it's wrong to show strength at a certain time. And he's like, you got to be able to turn on that alliance. And he walked him through scenario. And so this kid, went to school and the bully like came on him and put his hands on him. And so the kid does a judo throw, and but he told when he came back and told his instructor the story, he said, but as I threw him, and I've been doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for a couple years, and so we do judo as well, and so he does a goshi, so he throws it's a hip throw, so he does a hip throw of the kid, and as the kid's falling over, he grabs the kid's hoodie to hold his head so that the bully's head won't hit the floor. And so Jason's sharing this story, and he's going, I knew I was getting through the teaching of the lion and the lamb, because even when in that show of strength, he was concerned that he didn't injure the boy, even though he was clearly defending himself. Well, he was standing up against this injustice and this unfair treatment from the bully. And I think it's a beautiful picture because you put it on virtues, and that's, something that, man, it just makes me think about so many things. I'm going to do this podcast, things I want to write about manhood. Like, this has to become, maybe there's other men talking about this, I don't know, in the Christian space, Phil, but
not in our space.
To me,
John.
it's so brilliant because
I think we have to,
because I love, and your whole thing, it's just making my heart full, my brain melt down. I don't know how to say it, but like, just like you look at the strength of in so many different ways, and like, what is the guy that can bench press, over their body weight represent? It represents resistance, failure, persistence, and that could be expressed in a career, that could be expressed in relationships, that could be expressed in sports, that could be expressed in so many different fields. It is like bettering yourself, pushing through failure, being trained, being disciplined. And when we put it in virtues and we celebrate those virtues, and then Jesus being the ultimate example, and that's why we can roll together so closely, is because that's what like you said, and even if somebody ends up different on the gender debate, right? It's like, but if Jesus is their compelling vision, and I'm not trying to like sound like a Jordan Peterson disciple, but in this interview you did a while ago, it was like he's weeping in this interview, and he's like, you aim at Jesus or something lower. And I was like, I don't even know if a pastor could say that better.
No, it's
like,
incredible.
He is the ultimate. Obviously, he's more than like Christus exemplar. He's not just our example, right? He's our Savior. He's our Lord. He's the sacrifice for all mankind, right? But he is our example as well. And even Paul says, if you're going to follow me, do it as I follow Christ. Like he's our ultimate example. And when Jesus said, follow me, it was an invitation to not just worship him. And I'm so thankful that he got me out of hell, but it was an invitation to formation.
It was.
Like, you're supposed to become like me.
Yeah.
And so if we apply that to manhood and we do it tied to virtues, it's just so powerful, man.
And
profound.
There's a in a moment, and again, I would love to. We should do round two, because I would love to even talk about, because inevitably, I do think the picture of Adam and Eve, male and female, like but not like, military aid to each other, called to co-rule. I think that co-ruling picture is important, because the vision there ultimately is that we have an assignment. And it's an assignment side by side. Emily and I side by side are called to co-rule in our marriage, over our life, over our children, and over the things that God has asked us to do. And in that place, the unique things He's asked both of us to do, both in who we are as men and women, but then in the unique gifts He's placed on our life. I think where we can come underneath each other, right? In the vision of and again, I believe Ephesians 5. So I believe the vision of marriage is this vision of mutual submission, but not mutual submission out of sameness, mutual submission out of uniqueness. And I submit to Emily as the head, and Emily submits to me as the giver of life, right? And it's again another podcast to kind of break down how I see that. But that picture, but how we do this is this vision of co-ruling,
right?
And that's what our world needs. And I even think this vision of what it looks like in men. There's a sweet woman in our church who walked through a really, really hard season, and abusive husband. All of this kind of came to light. We didn't really know a lot of this, and when it came to light, we had to kind of, he was hiding from the police, and she was coming to us, and it was unique. And she had to go, but her kids needed some medicine. They had some unique things going on, and we know she had to go back to the house. But I just had that kind of gut feeling / discernment of like, he's watching the house, he knows the police are looking for him. This isn't safe. We've got to, but the police are gonna do all of the things she was asking them to do. And so she's like, I need to go get the medicine for my children, and I need to get a bunch of stuff. And she was going to have to be there for a little while, longer than the police were willing to just stick around. We asked them. And it's also like, so I called two friends, but one because he had locked her out of the house. So I had a friend who's a locksmith, and then I have a friend who's one of the most just massive, strong human beings I've ever seen in my entire life, and he's a firefighter, and he's a teddy bear, but he's ripped out of his mind, right? And these are two guys that I'm close with, And the three of us go to the house, and there's my friend who's the locksmith, who is just as like skinny and wiry as you can imagine. And then there's me, who's like just a normal dude, little chubby, needs to lose some weight, but just kind of whatever. And then there's my other friend, who is just genuinely one of the strongest, most in shape human beings I've ever seen in my entire life. Three totally different pictures on the outside of men. And yet there we were, and my friend, who's the locksmith, was bringing his incredible skills to the table of what only he could do, and I was there bringing what I brought to the table, which was just the central connection and care, and there was my friend who was there in case things to bring safety, and her husband did show up, and it did get wild, and God is kind, and police got involved, and everything turned out. And I just thought about and we were able to legitimately not only bring immediate help to this woman, but able to bring transformation. Her husband's now in jail, and our community's kind of come around her. It's been a really beautiful thing. But I just thought that's a picture of manhood. Yeah, three men, physically different, skill sets are different, personalities are different, quiet. Me and these two other guys could not be more different than each other. But we all stepped in as servant protectors. Yeah. And we all stepped in with our strengths. Right. And we all stepped in to bring covering over a beautiful woman who needed it. Yeah. And I think this is it. If men could see that this identity is in them, it's not about becoming someone else. Right. It's actually first and foremost, it's in their imago Dei. It's in them. Right. Two, Jesus is inviting them into the transformation of Christ likeness. Yeah. Right? The vision of all men is to become like Jesus. The vision of all women is to become like Jesus. So Jesus, but he's inviting us to do that within the way he's framed us and made us. And if we could stop seeing what we're not, or stop seeing this false vision of what we'll never be, and start going, oh, Jesus has put something in me, and I can find it. I think it would change the lives of men.
That's awesome. So let me ask you this. Can I get you a couple questions here to wrap up? Possible. So we could just keep going.
We've talked for a long time.
It's so good. I think it's so good. It's good for me. But how did guys react to this? What was the impact that you saw, and were you surprised by any of the impact?
If you're a pastor or you've been in these kind of environments before, and there's like literally maybe the hardest place of ministry to bring life and consistency is men's ministry. It just feels like it easily devolves into something guys do not want to be a part of, or it's just tough. And men, have full lives, and they're tired, and so what you do has to be pretty compelling. And so it's one of those things. So here's what I would say. I could not believe the amount of men who came, the turnout, the commitment. I've never done anything that has had this kind of response. It awakened men. Men felt empowered. Men found each other. Friendships came out of this. I've never done anything. I would tell you, I've probably never done anything in 8 weeks that has had as much fruit as this has had, both by the teachings, but then just getting men in an environment they wanted to be in. Yeah. They found each other. There's discipleship happening. There's friendships happening. There's things I didn't even talk about happening. But because the atmosphere of men wanting to be somewhere and feeling like there was a call that helped them find their way. And I think this is a season where people want clarity. We live in a world of confusion. And I feel like in many ways I gave men permission to be men, but in a way that was like Jesus. Yeah. Again, not in this hyper masculine or hyper feminine or responding to culture. Listen, at the end of the day, I think culture is a liar and is gonna do great damage in the world, like secular culture. But I'm not giving my life to somehow like have a middle finger to culture. I'm giving my life because I'm in love with Jesus. And he actually wants me to lay down my life for that very culture I'm resisting. Yeah. And I think when we could catch a vision of what I do in this place isn't about pushing against the lies of culture, though they're there. It's about finding how to faithfully know who I am in Christ and how to
Yeah.
follow him. And then from there, I get to do that Romans 12 thing of resistance and renewal.
Yeah.
And get to learn how to stand against the lies of the world and bring renewal into that place. But we have to start with the right thing, and the right thing is there's something in Jesus we've missed for us as men.
That's
Yeah.
awesome. So we could probably do a whole series on this, Phil, but
Maybe we should,
no,
John.
just
We
a
can
whole-
do it
yeah.
via Zoom from
Oh,
a
man.
distance, you know?
Well, view around too, because where I usually end up going when I talk to people, and these few times I've done it, so my interviews so far, though, is like a lot more to your personal story too, and how has, let's just even put it in light of the series that you've done, how has this impacted you personally, and intersected with your story, your heart as a man? Like, what has it meant to you personally?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's actually meant a lot to me personally. Again, part of it is connected to, John Tyson, who's a friend, and kind of released a book about intentional fatherhood
Right.
and primal path, and these are things that
I just ordered it today.
Yeah, we've been talking about a lot. And I'm taking my sons through, and a lot of that is like, how do you? Connected to this place of how do you raise a son into manhood if you don't even know what manhood is, right?
Yep.
And I don't say that condescendingly. I mean, that starts like, if I want to actually place my son as best as I can into the fullness of his identity, there's some of these things I have to walk through.
Mm-hmm.
And again, these are pieces of what's happened in my life. And again, I come proudly from a tradition of empowerment of women, both in the pastoral place, and Emily and I really function as co-leaders. Again, and even though I would no longer use the word egalitarian to describe that, that's the environment I come from. And again, I'm unified with people who are submitted to the lordship of Jesus, right? So it's not even, I'm not even, but in that, I think because I live in that world is has very little, like the idea of manhood is diminished there. It's anyone who wants to act like it isn't is lying.
Yeah.
And so I just felt like coming to this place where you could actually be like, no, I can be fully a man, and I'm not robbing anything from my wife. I'm actually empowering her.
Yeah.
And I can be fully a man, and it isn't like, actually toxic masculinity is false masculinity. Oppressive patriarchy is false masculinity. And the answer is not saying masculinity is nothing.
Yeah.
The answer is whatever masculinity is supposed to be.
Right.
And masculinity is incredibly beautiful, incredibly needed, and as is Christ-like femininity. And again, we've got to take these things back from the cultural false scenarios we've put them in and come back to the person of Jesus. And for me, in that, personally, I feel like what has happened through this is, I feel like I can be a voice of calling people to really not only understand their own, what God has given them in their own manhood, but to be the kind of men who help other men find that. And I don't think I would have been able to do some of that. So my personal story in that is I think there was a sense of not knowing how to fully express this for a lot of seasons, just especially in the tradition that I grew up in.
Yeah.
And that theologically I still would hold a lot of alignment with, right? But realizing, man, there's something missing, and we have to find that thing that's missing.
When you grew up through your teen years into your 20s, did you grapple with feeling man enough, feeling like you measured up, or were you pretty confident in the sense, like, or is that some, because
That's a great question.
there's a lot of, like, even New York Times just put an article out about like how basically a lot of guys they're probably surveying I would say the younger men, but it could creep up into some of the older decades. So I don't remember the exact demographic, but like that a lot of guys surveyed just don't feel good about their existence. Like they think something's wrong with them, like for being a man, or wrong with their version of manhood. So was that something you wrestled through early, or not so much?
So I deeply wrestled with confidence and insecurity and lies and secrets. I mean, was addicted to pornography at the age of 10, and what that does to you. And I don't remember ever thinking I didn't like I wasn't a real man or I wouldn't. So I don't know if I would connect it like I'm not man enough, but I didn't feel. I felt like. I carried such a fear of rejection, so I maybe just didn't have language for it. Like I can't ever remember consciously thinking like, I'm not a real man. I don't know how to be a real man, but I didn't know how to be a real man, and I was super insecure. I was constantly looking for affection. I was handed over my desires to broken sexuality. I lived in secrets and shame, and I didn't have I really, this is what I would say is whatever I thought about manhood was the stumbling of my own mistakes. And I had a good father, so I'm not saying I didn't.
Right.
But I think for whatever reason, this is a lost value that like manhood is something passed along.
Right.
So my dad, who's a fantastic dad, did not pass along manhood to me. And I don't say that out of disrespect to him. I just don't think any fathers did. I think it's a lost value.
Right.
And I think that's what happens ultimately porn taught me about sex.
Yeah.
I'm not saying my dad didn't have sex talks with me, but nothing compared to the porn I watched, right? So porn taught me about sex. Girls not liking me taught me about how to treat a girl and not well.
Right.
These things. So all of the pictures of manhood in my young life were actually shaped by trying to figure it out myself. And man, when I tried to figure it out myself, I screwed a lot of things up. Yeah. And that's what I want. I want to lead my sons in that place.
Right. Yeah. So if you could go back, final question, if you could go back to 13-year-old Phil and give him a piece of advice, what would you have said?
Man.
What would you say?
God's really in love with you. Like, I had so much shame.
Come on.
I think if I could, I would just be like, you got to trust me. The porn is killing your heart. Man, 13 is so young. I thought God hated me, or I thought He was so ashamed of me because I was ashamed of me, And I didn't know, I didn't know how to be honest. I was so afraid of being honest, but I didn't want the consequences of honesty. I wanted to have what I was having, right? I wanted to have what my secrets gave me.
Yeah.
And man, if I could have just, I guess this is more than one thing, but if I could have looked at myself and go, I promise you don't want it. There's something better. And you're gonna have to work through the pain of rejection. You're gonna have to work through the pain of sexual desire, unsatisfied in that season. But I promise you, it's what you really want.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. I legitimately didn't know that I wanted something more than those things.
Wow.
So I think that's what I would go back and say. God's safe. He's not angry, and He's not ashamed of you. He just wants to help you. And Jesus is better. I don't think I believed any of those things. Wow. Though I loved Jesus at that time, but I didn't know how to believe any of those things. Yeah.
Wow. That's really powerful, man. Thank you for sharing it. Bringing it down to the personal level. And if people want to are you going to release the course? Did you capture it?
Yeah, we did.
Or is
so
it already...
we're actually going to just make it we did both my notes and some discipleship stuff we wrote around it and the videos of it. We're actually going to release it for free in January, just to make it available to people. So once that's up, I'll, my Instagram is just P Manginelli, and I don't have a website or anything. My church called The Square, thesquare.org. So you'll be able to find all of that. When the time comes, I'll announce it on my Instagram, but you can always find it at our church's website, thesquare.org. So.
Oh. Awesome. Well, thanks for joining me, man.
Bro,
it's been
so
a rich conversation.
I know. This is meaningful to me. I hope it
does help.
Somebody.
It can help somebody. Yeah. Touch my heart. Encourage me. Encourage me in my marriage. And Grace will be encouraged by what you shared too, and her heart for husbands and wives to be a team and what we want to see in the body of Christ. So enriching, man.
Bro, I'm honored.
Love
Thanks,
you, man.
John. Love you too.
Thanks for joining the John Hammer Show. Please give us a thumbs up, like, and subscribe if you're enjoying the content here. And the best way to support this podcast is leaving us a great review. Thanks.